The lady's voice always scares me.
It's very GPS voice.
Yeah.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning into our second installment now of our Conversations with the Curator series. This will be a once a month lunch and learn style series that brings you behind the scenes of our collections and our exhibits. While the Sigel Museum has 3 floors of exhibits filled with artifacts such as textiles, ceramics, and family heirlooms, our collections are also home to over 5,000 books, 10,000 manuscripts, 120,000 photographs, and a countless number of maps, architectural plans, and family histories. My name is Sarah White. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at NCHGS, and I am joined today by my colleague Tim Betts, our Curator of Exhibitions. Before we get into today's topic, I want to give Tim a little chance to introduce himself and just kind of explain what his own research interests are and what he studies. And you take it
Sure.
from here, sir.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Tim Betts. I am the Curator of Exhibitions here at NCHGS. I look like I'm lagging on my screen. Do I look okay?
Fine to me.
Okay, great. Then in that case, I'll just ignore that. So I am, guess I would say I kind of came to museums the long way, but it was also kind of the inevitable thing. I'm trained as a studio artist. I did a degree in fine art, did a master's in art history at Penn State, master's in history at Lehigh,
Progress.
and I'm working on PhD in history. My PhD in history at Lehigh. So I'm still kind of doing that. My research interests are kind of all over the place. My work on my dissertation is about collections in the Spanish Empire. So the way in which collections of objects were used kind of by the Spanish crown as a way of showing their power and control over the territories they said they controlled. Anyway, been in museums for around 10 years now, I guess, kind of in various capacities. I'm very interested in historic trades and processes as well, and kind of preserving those. I somewhat recently published a book through the association, the AASLH, the kind of big museum group in the country, about maker spaces in museums and how learning historic practices is a way to teach about / learn about the past. So I guess you could say I am just kind of broadly interested in a lot of things, and I think they're all kind of connected to exhibit work. But enough about me.
Yeah, we're all here for the taxidermy dog, right?
Well, you're giving away the punchline, right?
Lord.
Okay, so Frank, let me give you a kind of frank introduction, I guess, and I think that's kind of the way to do it. I pulled some images about, well, we'll talk about how images about Frank are kind of a thing, but the idea of Frank. So Frank is a fire dog, or was a fire dog. I mean, he's eternal and wonderful. But Frank was a fire dog for the Humane Fire Company here in Easton. And I should mention this is, of course, like research that came out of our temporary exhibit, Forged by Fire, the Heroism, Honor, and History of Firefighting in Northampton County. But Frank has been kind of an important role in all of this. He's kind of been, I remember on my first day hearing about Frank and becoming very excited about Frank. So one of the central players in the history of firefighting in Easton and in the exhibit is the Humane Fire Company, a volunteer fire company that starts in Easton in 1797. We have their original pumper truck down in the lobby of the museum. They are operational in Easton till 1879. They are organizations putting out fires. They are also very much, and I think this is important for the Frank story, they are very much a like fraternal organization, right? They are like guys hanging out in the firehouse. So Frank is a dog, obviously. Frank was described as a white dog of a French pedigree who was a very fluffy dog. So he was a fancy boy. He was a French pedigree, but he was large, and he's described as large, white, and fluffy. So that sounds great. Sign me up for that. He was born in 1862. Uh, it seems like he was born, well, we know he was born in Philadelphia. And his mother, whose name we don't know, but his mother was owned by Harry Schaefer, who is the third baseman for the what's described as the Boston Club, but was then a baseball club known as the Boston Red Stockings, which is the extent of my sports knowledge. So I can kind of go no more deeper there. But his mother was owned by a baseball player at the time. Frank was given to the young puppy Frank was given to the I know it sounds little guy was given to the police chief of Easton in 1870. Well, shortly, sometime it seems post Civil War, so like 1870-ish, let's say. He is given to the police chief in Easton, and then he gives Frank to the Humane Fire Company, where Frank becomes part of the organization. And I think that's really kind of the case. So Frank pops up in a couple places, but he becomes a fire dog. Fire dogs were kind of a large part of fire stations and firehouse culture. We think of them now as Dalmatians, not always. Frank wasn't. He's a white dog of a French pedigree. He's not a Dalmatian, but they played important roles. We know that Frank played important roles because he's described. I mean, obviously these people loved him. Kind of more on that, but Frank is described as checking like the hoses, like inspecting hoses for leaks. He is described as like waking people up when there is a fire, like barking and causing a ruckus. He is like following the carriage and barking. If we're thinking of why fire dogs kind of in general, like Dalmatians or any of them, historically the role they played is they were the siren, right? There was a bell and there was all sorts of other stuff, but usually the fire dog runs alongside the fire apparatus, barking and getting people out of the way. Also protecting the horses. So they're like kind of, the horses are pulling the fire apparatus, right? So that's usually what the fire dog does. So Frank is part of the firehouse and was the kind of the thing I always find kind of lovely about him. There's this description that he goes to meetings of the Humane Fire Company, and they talk about him like sitting in the chair at the meeting, like following people as they're talking, which like I have two very kind of energetic and interesting dogs, and you can imagine them doing that, right? Because they're like little people with little personality. Well, in the case of mine, like big people with big personalities, but you can imagine him doing that, right? And then there's another little story, and then kind of more on kind of this research process, because I just kind of want to do like Frank in a nutshell and then kind of more about Frank. So
Yeah.
another thing we know about Frank is that Frank is at the firehouse, and the boys of the Humane, they always describe themselves as the boys of the Humane, are there. And one of the things we know about Frank is these guys hanging out in the firehouse teach Frank how to urinate out small fires that they set in the fire station. So they'll set a small fire and they trained Frank to urinate out the fires, which is wonderful. I love that. And it's like, I submit that to like people that say like history is boring. Like I give you a dog urinating out fires, right? Because that is, how great is that, right? And really, I think part of this is like, the humanity of the people that have Frank, right? Because it's like they're just people that are hanging out and doing things. So that's kind of the Frank in a nutshell, I guess, or at least Frank while Frank's alive, let's say. Because unfortunately, this is a story where the dog dies, unfortunately. But yeah, so should I can do why don't we do the obituary then? Because
Sure.
I know, like, why not? So Frank
The story
is
only gets better from here.
only gets better from here. Let me share my screen. So Frank, you can see the obituary there, right, Sarah?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is from the Easton Express. Frank dies in the end of 1877, and the Humane Fire Company runs a obituary for Frank. This is that death of a fire company's dog. Frank, the faithful old fire dog of the Humane Fire Company, died last evening at the hose house of that company. Frank was a remarkable animal and has quite a history. He was born in the house of the Marion Hose Company of Philadelphia about the year 1862, his mother being the property of Harry Schaefer, the renowned third baseman of the Boston Club, right? This is really a lot of what we know about Frank is from the obituary. So he's doing it. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, there's so much about Frank, and there's two other kind of fun Frank facts. Frank fact one, Frank liked to hang out underneath the hose carriage, which is a problem because hose carriage big and heavy and moves. The obituary says this thing, where is it here? He's sleeping through panes of glass, he's listening to conversations, that he was unfortunate enough to be run over several times by the hose carriage, which that seems pretty unfortunate to me. Though that just seems like something he bounces back from. And then the other thing is Frank participates in parades. Parades are a large part of firehouse culture in the 18th century and in the 19th century and continue to be. You have your parade, you wear your parade finery, you go down the street, right? And at that, Frank is described as having his mustache and tail dyed pink, which is lovely. It's great. I'm sure that's great. I mean, of course, we have to assume like this is the 19th century and these are all like dudes in a firehouse. So like Frank was probably very smelly and very much needed a bath. And Frank also, I mean, like, I don't want to think what that dye was for, what the dye was made out of. But the really interesting thing here in the obituary, I mean, all of it's interesting and all of it's very like vivid in the way that 19th century newspapers are vivid, right?
Mhm.
Which is like there's all sorts of details in there. But like the end of it is this really kind of well, there's like the apparatus of the company never left the house on any occasion, but that the faithful canine accompanied it. It's lovely.
The
But
faithful canine.
then his hide will be retained by the humane boys who have placed his body in the hands of a taxidermist for preservation. So Frank dies in 1877. And the first thing it seems the guys of the Humane do is have his body taxidermized. They have it preserved. That's interesting, right? So of course you can see where you can probably assume where this is going to go, which is that it became a mission to find him, this dog. But more on that in a minute. Uh, this is the meeting minutes of the Humane Fire Company. It's one of the volumes. We have them in our archives here at the Sickle Museum in CHGS, just right down the hall from me. So they keep these minutes of, like any organization, they're going to keep minutes then and now. The minutes are really fascinating because they are like, a lot of stuff is happening in them, but it's also you can see like the guys having their kind of like petty squabbles with themselves. Like there's a large instance where there is this big argument over lounging and loafing in the firehouse. But I bring the minutes in. This is February 1878. This is one entry in it. They always go in and they like do the bills and expenditures and all the stuff, like what an organization does. But what's interesting for us, on a motion of Messrs. Munzinger and Bishop, that as soon as dog is received, a glass case be made and Mr. Hildebrandt to build it. So we know then, and this is like mentioned in some other account of this, that Frank's body is placed in a glass case, not unlike Snow White, right? And Frank is the company here in February 1878 is basically allocating money for that to be built. Then at that same meeting on the next page, the dog comes back. So there's like this moment where the meeting stops, the dog having been brought in. And we think that means, or that's probably, right, just from like the context, that's probably Frank. Though they will acquire another dog that they name Frank 2 that they don't like as much. It's not as good as Frank, the first Frank. But the dog having been brought in, it was on motion by Bishop and Broadsman that a recess of 5 minutes be taken to examine the same. Then the meeting is called back into order. So there's this like moment, and it's really like, as like a historian, this is really kind of cool because there's this moment where like you see something happen like in a document, right? Because it's like, oh, we're going to have the case made, we're having the meeting, then the taxidermy dog comes back, and then the meeting stops because, like, of course, once you've brought a taxidermy dog back, you have to then like there has to be something that happens. You don't just keep doing your business, right? Like you have to stop and consider that, right? But that's wonderful, I think, and it's fascinating. This is where textually for Frank, it gets interesting, right? So the Humane exists for 2 more years as a volunteer company. Then the Easton Fire Company is started. They're a paid company. When that happens, the volunteer fire companies in Easton dissolve and become fraternal organizations. They become like just a place for guys to hang out, and they'll have like parade, and I shouldn't say just because it's having an important social role for them, but they'll do parades and all this sort of thing. But at that moment in 1879, the Humane liquidates all of their assets. They sell everything. The library, they have a library, which is really interesting. They'll like check out books, and some of them we actually have 2 of them we stumbled across in the archives that are a like account of the Spanish-American War, which I'm not very well, not Spanish American War, the Mexican War, which is interesting. They're super interesting stuff. But they liquidate everything, including, it seems, they sell Frank, the taxidermy body of Frank. Uh, there's a lot of debate in the minutes about doing it. Like there'll be a motion to sell the dog, and then there'll be like motion to not sell the dog, and they'll like argue about it because like, well, like, what kind of monster is going to sell this taxidermy dog? But it seems that the dog ends up possibly in Morristown, New Jersey. Possibly.
Oh,
And it's possible that is the case because like the Morristown Fire Company acquires other stuff from the Humane and seems like they had kind of always been kind of like a friend of the Humane.
oh,
But either way, that's where Frank's trail runs cold. But he kind of yeah, so he lived, and I think lived like a life in which he was very loved. I think this was a very loved dog. And seems like a very kind of interesting dog. But he then has this kind of fascinating afterlife. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention because I got kind of wrapped up in it. Frank's taxidermy body then is included in parades. So like as Frank in life was in parades, so too Frank in death was in parades, which is fascinating in a way. I always say like the 19th century is just filled with like these kind of like wild, deranged things that happen, and this is kind of one of them. But of course, and I think this is kind of the well. Do you have any questions about that, Sarah? I realize I'm kind of kind of going on
I am
about it. But
I am enthralled. That's
okay,
all I could say.
okay. So then begins what I've affectionately called in my mind the hunt for Frank, right? Because like you can't I can't be presented with this idea because like this dog is taxidermied and is put in a case and then possibly ends up in Morristown, possibly somewhere else. But ultimately, like the dog becomes an artifact, right? So it's like that doesn't just go away, right? Because it's like ultimately, like there is or was a dead dog in a case somewhere, right? So it doesn't disappear. It's somewhere. So of course we hunted for it, right? This includes like calls to the fire company in Morristown, like, hey, do you have a dead dog? And then be like, no, you have the wrong place. And then they're like, us, we had an intern do it, but like, and, and they're like, no, we have the right place, right? No, this is a real thing. This isn't like a joke, unfortunately. But uh Frank, we've hunted there. There were other leads, potentially that he ended up in another museum that is known for collecting all sorts of stuff. In Bucks County, potentially all sorts of places. But the short of it is we never found him. Uh, it's always my hope that someday, like, we'll get a call that, oh, I have a taxidermied fluffy dog somewhere. But yeah, the trail for Frank has kind of run cold, that's to say. So like unfortunately, there have been a time where I was like hopefully setting aside a spot in Forged by Fire that would be like, this is where Frank goes. But I mean, he has a little wall there where this kind of story is told, but yeah, no actual Frank, unfortunately. Uh yeah, which is sad. I do hope someday, but there's also some not, there are some downsides to a possible Frank appearing, I would say. So I give you what
There he is.
we've affectionately called slash we've has become the joke. This is what I've described as my Bigfoot photo. So this is a photo of the boys of the Humane with their fancy carriage. The fancy carriage is a whole other thing. The fancy carriage, that's the fancy carriage, the thing they're pulling, and as you can see, it's very fancy. This was the Humane's parade carriage. This actually wins a lot of awards nationally and internationally at various expositions in Philadelphia and New York in the 19th century. This is in New Jersey as well. They sell this off. It's made literally of gold and silver. It's
Oh.
quite a thing. But I call this my, well, this is also, I should also mention for like those of you that are familiar with Easton slash where the Sigel Museum itself is, this, the street the boys of the Humane are standing on is 4th Street. The cross street here is Northampton Street. So if you're familiar with Easton, the hotel behind them, the Central Hotel, that's the Hotel Lafayette now. Uh, it's like we're really standing like, basically if I were to walk over to the window in the office there, I can see where they're standing, which is tantalizing. It makes me wish I had a time machine.
Hmm.
But why I call it my Bigfoot photo is the thing there, which I have an affectionate close up there,
Oh.
which underneath the hose cart or the fancy carriage, to me, there are those that disagree with me here. But I think that looks like a fluffy white dog sitting underneath a carriage, and we know Frank had been run over by a carriage many times. Maybe. If that's the case, this is the only potentially known photo of Frank. I'm putting in a lot of maybes, supposes, perhaps, because I mean, like, our curator of collections, Monica, and the other side of this wall will probably be happy to hear me say, we can't know for sure that this is Frank.
Hmm.
I want this to be Frank, but like as a historian, I have to have some level of, skepticism about it. But as much as I want that to be Frank, and as much as it probably is Frank, it could also be Frank too, the less good version, though also I'm sure a very good boy.
Right.
But this is the closest we get tangibly to a potential Frank, which is actually really interesting in a 19th century sense, because like photography is new, right? And like you could imagine that Frank would be photographed, but like if he has been photographed, we don't have that photograph or it hasn't surfaced.
Hmm.
That's another thing I've been hoping that like people would like hear that we're doing this and be like, oh, here's a photo I have. Right. Here's a fluffy white dog in Easton with the fire company. Is this it? Right. But ultimately, we don't know. Uh, I guess that's to say, like, long story short, like whenever we're doing kind of these exhibits, there is a massive amount of work that goes on behind the
Mhm.
scenes, right? Uh, I thing I kind of say is like an exhibit's like an iceberg, right? You just see the top and then there's like a whole bunch bigger thing below. Frank's kind of that a little bit, right? Because like Frank's been like I've talked about Frank to like anyone who will listen, right? Because I think he's kind of fascinating. But like he's the one that got away, right? Because he's this like interesting little moment of a historical moment. But I mean, like, I don't think we can quite get any more tangibly closer to him.
Mhm.
Do you like what do you think, Sarah?
That was going to lead me into one of the questions I was going to raise after letting you explore all of your possibilities here, but
I
I
know I feel like I did that too much, but
no, he deserves it. Okay.
he deserves it.
Yes, very the goodest boy. So I think that in looking at this photo in particular, I mean, as historians, we're trained to look at things in certain ways and to look at what would be historically probable
Right,
versus what is just possible.
right.
Like, is it probable, in my opinion, that it's Frank, given what I know, the information you've provided, the fact that he is sitting under the carriage, that it is clearly a white, fluffy thing. It is taken in a place that he would have been at the time that he would have been surrounded by the men he would have been around. Is it probable? I think so. But broadly, is it possible? And can we definitively say for sure? No.
No,
But
absolutely not. No.
that's also the field that we work in.
Yeah, and
Right.
that's the
Yeah.
thing. I think a lot of people think like, like one of the things I think that's a problem in how like we talk about slash teach history is people think it's a lot about like numbers and dates and names,
Right.
right? Like this happened this date, this happened this date, this is that. But so much of history, like so much of everyday life is up to interpretation,
Mhm.
up to making educated supposing, up to how you are the context in which you're thinking about it, right? So it's like there is so much that we know, but the more we really know, the less we do know, right?
Mhm.
If that makes sense, right?
Oh
There
yeah,
is
sure.
just so much, so many questions.
Mhm.
Uh, but the other element of this is the if we did find Frank, big if,
Mhm.
would we have wanted him? Right? I mean, we want him
Oh,
because we love him, right?
uh-huh.
And there was like kind of like I was saying, oh, we should bring him home and we should give him a proper burial, all of this, right? But like Frank was taxidermized at a time where like if Frank is dangerous, actually, because taxidermy in the 19th century, the kind of two big ingredients that are used often are arsenic and mercury. Uh, they are dangerous, right? Arsenic's a poison, and we know in the 19th century, it is, books, wallpapers, textiles are done in arsenic green, and people are becoming sick and dying because of their encounters with them. Either the wallpaper goes or I do. There's then mercury is also dangerous, right? Mercury is this we have this phrase we say like mad as a hatter, right? And the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. But like hatters used mercury in their profession, right? As a way to make hats.
Mhm.
And mercury can cause issues with the brain, right? So Frank would be dangerous potentially. And then there's also the reality that Frank could be we might not want to look at him. It might be truly upsetting. So which I kind of then giggle about, but like, like we don't know what Frank actually looks like if
Mhm.
Frank still exists. And that's to say he might not be a good taxidermy. So he might have been more of a curse than a blessing. I guess that's to say.
Not that it's his fault. He was just an unfortunate product of the Victorians' obsession with things that could kill them.
Correct. Yeah.
For folks who maybe haven't seen already, speaking of arsenic, as we do fairly often in this job, actually, I am going to include in the chat, there's a link to a program that we did about a year ago by now about arsenic used in book bindings. And we do have an arsenic book. We bring it out. Tim very kindly puts together a little cabinet of creepy curiosities in October that features this green book. Very, very safe, so no worries. I had to do two things at once here. There we go. There's a link to that. But Tim, I wondered if, I'm not even quite sure how to phrase this. What do you think, like our obsession with Frank from the 21st century, looking back to the 1870s, what kind of parallels do you see in this kind of, if you'll forgive but we can't go through a single program here without me making a bad pun or a joke, but in the humanity of these guys that just these
Boys of the
guys that
Humane,
just
yeah.
loved their dog, right?
Yeah, I think that's why it's so wonderful, right? Because I think we all either have dogs or we have dogs in our life, or just like broadly animals, right? Like we love animals. And I think there is this kind of, we think about it. I think it's easy to think of like having your pet you love as like a very modern thing, but it's super not, right? Like
Mhm.
people, we've as a species had like animals that have been our like companion animals like forever, right? Like
Mhm.
dogs become domesticated by like coming around like the campfires of early humans, right? Like it's this
Mhm.
long is a relationship that we like evolved together. So like I think what's really interesting, because I feel like I say this all the time, but it's true, right? Like it's like when we think of people of the past, we think of them as these like serious dudes in like a photograph,
Mhm.
right? And like there they are on the street corner, they're all posing. But these guys kind of like these guys look like people you want to get a beer with. Like they look kind of fun, I think. And like I kind of know they work, like given from the meeting minutes, except when you're lounging and or loafing. But what's really interesting about Frank, though, or I think what I find so compelling about Frank, because it's like, of course, Frank was wonderful, but it's like just the way that these guys obviously like loved this dog
Mhm.
and like saw him as their mascot to the point that they maybe took it a little too far, like that they had him taxidermied, and that's like maybe a step we shouldn't do. I don't know. I don't know. Do whatever you want. But it's really this wonderful moment where the past comes to life
Mhm.
in really kind of a, I think, a really interesting way. And it's like this dog, we can talk about kind of like the things he did, but it's like the way they kind of remembered him and the way he was someone that they wanted to keep around. Like that's really,
Mhm.
it's a really interesting historical moment, I think.
Mhm. And we see that today with folks who they have pets and they want to have um the little memorial box in their home.
Yeah.
And I think it just really reinforces that not only do we say this every day, but we are talking about real dudes
Yeah.
that
Real people.
led regular lives and were probably just as fun and strange as the rest of us.
Right. I mean,
Um,
like, admittedly, some of us are stranger than others.
oh,
I
hey,
would say that about myself.
you know,
But
that's okay. We're
yeah,
here
but I
talking
think
about a taxidermy dog, Tim.
I know. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just very important. I think that's important on a like when we're talking about something like I don't want to say like low stakes, but like something like these guys with their dog. And I think it's just as important when you're thinking about like other historical people,
Yeah.
right? Like marginal, like people who are marginalized by history, like people that had like violence done to them, people that like lived through like very like horrific things. Like it's important to like always remember that these people were real people,
Mhm.
right? Like it's important to like find humanity. And it's also like the other side of it too, because it's like people in the past that do horrible things. Like you have to find the humanity in that too, right? Because it's
Mhm.
like not it's complicated and that's a deeper thing. But like I think it's very important. I think one of the lessons Frank and the boys of the Humane can teach us is that these people were real people, which
Yeah.
is a like an easy and almost like silly thing to say, but it's a true thing, right? And that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's most often the simplest things that you can say that every once in a while you need someone to say that simple thing to you for you to remember how obvious it is in the first
100%.
place. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anybody in the group today have any questions about Frank in general or the rabbit hole that we went down to try to find him or where we might go next?
Do you have him?
Do you have this dog? I'm going to start cold calling people. Do you have a taxidermy dog? Think you have the wrong number. I guarantee you I do not.
I had such hopes, Sarah.
Nope, nope, nothing. Nothing. No one has any questions?
Tim, it's
Yeah, hi.
Barbara. It's your cousin Barbara.
Hey,
I just want to tell you how interesting this is and how I enjoyed every minute of it.
good. I'm glad you came.
Wonderful.
Yes. So I plan on coming to as many of these as I can.
Awesome.
Just because it's nice to hear a little bit about history, even though it doesn't touch me that much. It's history. And we should be interested in it. And thank you.
Thank you.
That is lovely to hear. Thank you.
I mean, I did pull if I just because I know these are here, like other historical examples of taxidermy. Maybe permit me a minute.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet Jesus, what is this?
This was in as my example of what Frank could be.
Oh,
This is the
no.
Lion of Gripsholm Castle from Sweden in 1731. Yeah, he's a really bad taxidermy by people that never saw a lion. A lion pelt just got sent to Sweden and then they taxidermied it. Bad idea. Here is Maria Theresa of Austria's dog. Maria Theresa was the Empress of Austria and like mother/grandmother of like much of European aristocracy in the 18th century. She's Marie Antoinette's mother. But this is a photo that our curator of collections, Monica Bugbee, took in Vienna at the Museum of Natural History. So like maybe kind of another dog, but you know, this was a very rich dog.
Oh.
The struggle with the quarry, John Hancock, not the John Hancock you're thinking, another John Hancock, American taxidermist. It's Theodore Roosevelt's taxidermy kit that I just put in there for fun. But really what I wanted to show you, because I mean, we could talk about like taxidermied, you know, in natural history museums like Akeley's gorilla dioramas and things like that. But like the real thing that people don't know about, like real 19th century taxidermy that's fascinating, is Walter Potter. Walter Potter was a British guy and he taxidermied animals. I pulled the squirrels because people find it less upsetting. He does stuff with cats too. That's more upsetting. And he places them in anthropomorphized, like where they become people. So this is the Squirrel Club, where the squirrels are gambling. And then he did like the frogs, frogs, but the park. But I mean, like, that's to say, like, Frank wasn't an aberration. Frank was, you know, part of a broader fascination with taxidermy. I just knew I had those squirrels in the club and I needed to show them. I needed to get it out.
Oh, that's the thing you see when you haven't slept enough.
I know. Yeah. But no, this is being a museum curator is a fun job.
Sure is something, isn't it?
Sure is something.
It's something. I'm not going to unsee that frog picture now.
Sorry.
Thanks for that. So if we don't have any other questions, we are at about 12:45. As a reminder, you do not need to sign up for these programs. You can send next month's Zoom link to anyone you would like. All you got to do is tune in. This will be up on our YouTube channel, NCHGSPA. We have last month's up already as well. And next month, we are going into quite the quite the character. I'll say that without giving it away. I like to refer to her adventures, one of
Adventurous.
many, as the Great Balloon Ascension, which is exactly as phenomenal as it sounds, that took place in Easton.
Mhm.
Without giving too much away, let's just say another 19th century oddity. But
Very much so.
yeah, we're on a
Very much.
roll here, I think.
We are. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, if no one has any other questions, we will see you all next month. And that date is March 27th at 12 p.m. All right. We'll see you all then. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks all.